Welcome to day 1 of the 12 Days of Celtic Mythology, Series 2. Over the next 12 days, I'm going to be telling the story of Culhwch and Olwen and using that as a springboard to talk about some of the weird and wonderful corners of Celtic mythology. If you follow the series, then I hope you'll come out with a clearer understanding of this tale, which certainly has a lot of baffling aspects. So I know it can be a bit daunting to try to read Culhwch and Olwen without guidance. Whether you're following this on YouTube or as a member of the live class, you'll be able to find a list of references to my sources for each day's talk and other information you might like to have on the YouTube page for each day's video. So let's get into the story. I'm going to use a few visual aids. So here's our story. Culhwch was a king's son who wedded a princess called Geiriadur, the daughter of Anlawd Wledig. When, in time, Geiriadur fell pregnant, she was overcome by madness and ran away into the wilderness. As her time to give birth drew near, she regained her sanity, but she found that she'd wandered into a place where pigs were being reared. She took fright when she saw the pigs. She went into labor and was delivered of a son. The swineherd cared for the child and named him Culhwch, which means pig run. Later, the boy was fostered as befitted a king's son. Geiriadur became gravely ill, and on her deathbed, she asked Culhwch not to remarry until he saw a two-headed briar rose growing on her grave. After 7 years, he saw such a rose, so he looked for a new wife. He chose the wife of King Doged. So Doged was killed, and the lady and her daughter came to Culhwch's court, where they were married. One day, the new queen went for a walk, and she met with a hag who had the power of magical sight. She inquired of the hag as to whether her new husband would give her children, for he appeared to have none. I foresee that he will give you children, and it may be that your own child will be his heir, although he has one son already. The queen demanded of her husband why he had concealed his son from her. He replied that he would conceal him no longer and sent for Culhwch. And Culhwch was returned to the court, and a fine-looking young lad he was. One day, Culhwch's stepmother spoke to him. "It's time you were seeking a wife. Why not take my daughter? She would make an excellent wife for any nobleman." Now Culhwch, not wishing to give offense, and not wishing to marry the girl either, said, "I'm too young to marry." But the queen was angered, and she swore a destiny on Culhwch that he would never lie with a woman unless he got the maiden Olwen for his wife. Olwen, the daughter of Ysbyddaden, chief giant. And at that moment, Culhwch blushed, for he was filled with love for Olwen, although he had never seen her. Later, he met his father, who asked him why he was blushing. He told his father of the destiny sworn on him by the queen. He was now filled with longing for Olwen, daughter of Ysbyddaden, chief giant. His father reassured Culhwch. "You need not worry," he said, "for King Arthur is your cousin. Go to his court and ask him to trim your hair, and ask him to get Olwen for you as a gift." Culhwch mounted himself on a young gray steed, a 4-year-old strong in the chest, with hooves like shells, and its saddle and bridle of gold. He carried 2 spears of shining silver and a broad axe, so keen it would draw blood from a breeze as swiftly as a dewdrop falls in June. He wore a gold-hilted sword on his thigh with a golden blade. His shield, also of gold, bright as lightning, with an ivory shield boss set in its center. At his feet were 2 white-breasted, brindled hounds, each with a broad collar of red gold from ear to shoulder. As the steed moved beneath Culhwch, The two dogs bounded from left to right, crossing and recrossing in front of him like two swooping swallows, and like four swallows in the air above his head, four clods of turf flew from his steed's hooves with every stride. He sat upon a purple cloak with an apple of red gold at each corner, each apple the value of 100 cows. The value of 300 cows was in his boots and his stirrup straps. So lightly moved the steed beneath him that not even the tips of his hair were stirred. And thus Culhwch was, as he approached Arthur's court. "Is there a porter?" Culhwch cried when he came to the gate. "There is," replied a voice. "I am Arthur's porter every 1st of January." And then the speaker from behind the door began to list all the other porters who served throughout the year. "Open the door," shouted Culhwch. "I will not," came the reply. So I thought we'd look at the figures of Culhwch and Arthur in this session. Most of us first encounter Arthur in modern films or novels. These usually dress up old legends and literature in new ways, or even attempt to recreate a historical Arthur. What we're witnessing when we enjoy these things is just the current phase of a process that's been going on for over 1,500 years. A process that has piled layer upon layer of questionable history and literary portrayals of Arthur on top of the original. In the earliest literary Arthur that I want to share with you, I want the historical theories about him or the battles that have been fought to kind of fall to one side. I'm probably not the right person to talk to if you're interested in that kind of thing. Was Arthur real? Where was his battle? I'm more interested in how the early Welsh saw Arthur before the influence of Norman literature took hold. Even that's far too big a topic for today, but I'll do my best to kind of boil it down for you. So Arthur is mentioned briefly in some of the earliest Welsh poetry, such as the Gododdin elegies. These supposedly have their origins in the early 7th century, a bit later than Arthur supposedly lived. Arthur is mentioned in only one stanza out of about 100. In that poem, a fallen warrior is being praised, even though, in the words of the poet, he was no Arthur. Well, that kind of reference tells us that Arthur's name must have been instantly recognized by the audience of the poem. Otherwise, such a comparison would be meaningless. There's a similar kind of reference to whelps or cubs of Arthur in an old elegy for Cynddylan from around the same period. Although whether that line really refers to Arthur at all, it's a bit less certain. References like the one in the Gododdin confirm that Arthur was not only well known, but he was thought of as superlatively great. And that's sort of how he's portrayed in Culhwch and Olwen. Arthur is mentioned in the 9th century Historia Brittonum, the one originally attributed to a monk called Nennius. And there are two types of references there. One sort are historical, and that's not to say that they're historically accurate by our modern standards of historical accuracy, but it does say that the 9th century author was at least trying to write about history. So he gives a list of Arthur's 12 battles. Some analysts believe that list might actually stem from a lost bit of early Welsh poetry. Then, appended to some copies of the Historia Brittonum, is a text called the Mirabilia, or the Marvels of Britain. There are two references to Arthur in that text, but they're in a different category entirely. One is about the grave of one of Arthur's sons, who's called Anir or Amr, and it says, if one measures this grave repeatedly, the measurement will be different each time. One time 12 feet, another 6, another 9, and so on. The other marvel associated with Arthur references part of the story found in Culhwch and Olwen. It describes a stone with a footprint of a dog on it. When he hunted the boar Trent, it says, Cabal, who was the dog of Arthur the soldier, impressed his footprint on the stone, and Arthur afterward collected a pile of stones under the stone, whereupon was the footprint of his dog, and this is called Carn Cabal. Well, obviously, these stories aren't even an attempt at history. They're legends, probably handed down as folklore, or maybe in poetic sagas, which are long lost. And this is similar to the material that we find in early Welsh poetry about Arthur and in Culhwch and Olwen. One of the most intriguing early Arthurian poems is found in the Black Book of Carmarthen, a manuscript dating to the 13th century, but containing texts which are older. We always need to remember that experts can usually date a manuscript, and they can often date the text written down in the manuscript. In many cases, the text has been copied from somewhere, and they can often tell how old it is from things like how words are spelled and how words are used, because language changes. But dating the story a text tells is much more difficult. Anyway, the poem in question is called Who is the Porter, or Who is the Doorkeeper? And it probably dates to the 10th or 11th century. It shares many themes with Culhwch and Olwen. When I left off telling our story today, the porter encountered by Culhwch, the one who refused to open the door there at the end, he hadn't been identified yet, but he's called Glewlwyd Gyfaelfawr. Glewlwyd means pale or gray-haired hero, while Gyfaelfawr means something like strong or mighty grip. So we're going to be doing a lot of translating of names in this series. That's your first one. Glewlwyd is also the doorkeeper in this poem, Who is the Doorkeeper? But this time, he refuses to open the door to Arthur. What man is the gatekeeper? Glewlwyd Gyfaelfawr. What man asks it? Arthur and Caiwyn. Who travels with you? The best men in the world. Into my house you will not come unless you reveal them. Reveal them appears to mean reveal their names or reveal their identity. As a result, most of the rest of the poem consists of Arthur listing some of his best-known companions from Culhwch and Olwen and other stories. He mentions Mabon ap Modron and Manawyd, son of Llŷr, Kai and Bedwyr, and many others in the course of the poem, telling what great warriors they were. And that's one of the interesting things. He says they are with him, yet he speaks of them in the past tense. So he says, Manawyd, son of Llŷr, whose counsel was weighty, and Mabon, son of Mellt, he used to stain the grass with blood. Perhaps a suggestion here is that Arthur is now old, so he and his old comrades are standing at the gates, reminiscing and remembering their past glories. But why is Arthur being kept outside? Maybe the point of Glewlwyd keeping him out just for comic effect. Or maybe something else is going on here. Is it possible that Arthur and his men are dead and they're trying to gain entry into some kind of otherworldly place where dead warriors go, for example? That's Gwilym Morris Baird's theory, and it could well be right. We don't know, and this text is typical of depictions of Arthur from this period. He's generally portrayed as old, even slightly comical. He does a few great deeds, but many feats are delegated to his famous followers. As a character, Arthur isn't very clearly drawn yet, but then characters rarely are in texts from this period. Their thoughts, their motivations aren't revealed to us. In the case of Arthur, there's certainly a sense that he was very special. He has powers that others don't have. But even so, his mighty band of warriors do a lot of the heavy lifting, and each have magical powers of their own, which are listed in detail in Culhwch and Olwen. This listing of warriors in Who is the Doorkeeper runs to some 80 lines, recounting the highlights of various victories along the way. The poem breaks off in the middle due to a missing page in the manuscript, so we aren't quite sure how long the list really was. We will see the listing of warriors carried to extremes in Culhwch and Olwen in a section known as the court list. It can be a frustrating few pages to read, but fun to explore if you know how. Now, let's turn our attention to Culhwch for a moment. He's supposed to be the hero of the story. So who is he? He certainly isn't an important character in other Welsh literature. Although the story tells us that his name means pig run, it's more likely that its original meaning is slender pig. And there's evidence that this name references some very early mythology concerning humans transformed into pigs. Both domestic pigs and wild boar play an important part in this story. And while they may at times be heroes or monsters, it's possible that they also act as symbols, perhaps echoing mythic material, which probably wasn't fully clear to the author of the version of Culhwch and Olwen that we have. The author is very much a collector, a borrower. He's a hoarder of names and stories attached to them. They say that a hoarder's problem is not being able to decide what's worth keeping and what isn't. So they just keep everything. Now, the oral traditions of Celtic cultures were very conservative. That is to say, they focused on conserving their lore. Much of the training of bards and druids who preceded them was given over to memorization of stories, poems, laws, genealogies. And we'll see the result of this frequently in Culhwch and Olwen, not only in frequent lists of names and events, but in the tendency to sort of shoehorn two versions of a story into one when two versions were known, or to simply kind of go on a little side quest and tell the other version. I hope that in the coming days, I'll be able to guide you safely through the somewhat cluttered house that is Culhwch and Olwen, because it's full of treasures. Now, I've got a couple of questions for you. We'll be discussing these in the live class, but if you're watching on YouTube, then I hope you'll answer in the comments and get in on the challenge. First, simple question. Have you read Culhwch and Olwen before? Second, if you have read it before, did you enjoy it? Did you feel you understood it? Or did you just get awfully discouraged? So I'll just go over those once more. Have you read it? And then kind of how did it go for you? Did you manage to finish? Did you feel you understood it? How did it go for you if you read Culhwch and Olwen? So I'd love to hear your honest answers to this. It's fine if you haven't read it or couldn't make sense of it. Lots of people can't. Hopefully, wherever you're at, this series will be useful for you. So I'll see you tomorrow. If you enjoyed this video, why not sign up for my upcoming class, Introduction to Celtic Mythology? It will be packed full of research tips like the ones in this video. And it will also provide you with the knowledge and context you need to study Celtic mythology with confidence. You can also follow me or support me on Patreon, or find information on upcoming classes and events on my website.